Hello, writers, and welcome back to Spooky Writes. My name's Kemal Onor, and on today's episode, I'm going to be talking all about point of view within your writing. So let's head in the storm. Okay, writes. So, point of view is going to be the perspective that your story is told from, and I'm going to be covering three different point of views that a lot of stories are told in, and I'm going to tell you one to avoid, or rather one that's going to be kind of gimmicky. So make sure you stick around for the whole video because that will be coming later. So the first point of view that I want to touch on is the first person narration. Now this is going to be the most natural way of storytelling. It's the way that we tell stories to friends of ours. It's the way that we naturally tell stories to other people. We use the pronoun I. It's now in writing, this is when a character is often narrating the story, and in many cases this is usually the protagonist character, though sometimes it might be a side character who just happens to be around the protagonist character. But using first person narration gives a lot of intimacy for the reader because the reader is going to be in the mind of the protagonist character, or is going to be in the mind of a character who is central to the conflict, or a character who is observing from nearby to that of the protagonist character. And first person perspective puts the reader very close to the action within the story, puts it very close to the emotion. You get this strong sense of intimacy between the reader, and point of view can be used. Deciding on what kind of point of view you want to tell your story from is going to have pros. It's also going to have cons. So this is something that you need to think about before you sort of start writing your story. Something that will help you in terms of thinking about what scenes to include in your story, because first person narration is very great for creating intimacy between the protagonist, or rather, first person narration is great for creating intimacy between the reader and the narrator character. And again, sometimes this might not be the protagonist; it might be even the antagonist. You might have a story that's told from the antagonist's point of view, and it just happens to be told using the pronouns I. So first person narration creates a very close intimacy between the reader and the narrative character. But one of the cons to using first person narration is that you're limited in how you're able to tell the story. You're limited in what that character is able to see, what that character is able to witness. So you can't have a first person narration where a character is in a different room. That character won't be able to know what's going on behind closed doors, because that character's experience would be sitting outside the room. They might be just kind of staring at their hands, or they're off doing something else. And so there are ways that you can kind of hint at this. You might have a character who was in the room come out and tell that the narrator character, this is what happened in the room, or this battle happened that while you were away, or this evil thing happened while you were away. And so it could be then told secondhand through that of the narrative character. So first person narration. Prose is going to create a lot of intimacy. It's a very natural way of storytelling. Let's head into our second point of view. So the second point of view that I want to touch on that a lot of stories use is going to be called third person omniscient. Now, omniscient literally means all knowing. So you're going to be telling the story from third person. You're going to be using third person pronouns. So he, him, she, her. And this is when the angle is going to be kind of over the shoulder of characters. Now, omniscient, again, means all knowing. So one of the big pros of this is that you can cover a lot of ground using third person omniscient. This is why many fantasy stories are told using third person omniscient, because it requires to have so much world building included in it. It requires you to cover vast swaths of land, and requires you to jump around a lot. You might have characters who are across the sea, and there might be a scene where a king and queen are getting married, and then we have our characters over in the other on a boat traveling. They're kind of stuck in the wind, but so third person narration has sort of a distance, rather third person omniscient, because I am breaking third person down into omniscient, which is all knowing, and then it's much more intimate version, which is third person limited. Now, just like first person narration, third person limited is going to create a fair amount of it's going to create a closer relationship with that of omniscient, because the omniscient point of view kind of has us looking down from a distance, because we're able to see everything all at once. We're able to know more than what the protagonist character knows. We're able to jump around from mind to mind. If a character walks into a room, we can know everything about that room. We can talk about the side character who is sitting there. We can know what he or she is thinking. So third person omniscient is great if you have a lot of characters in a story, and if you want to be jumping around from their thoughts, because again, if you're in first person narration, you are limited to that one character's point of view. You can't jump out of that character's mind. You're kind of stuck with that protagonist character. But third person omniscient is great for creating a larger swath. It allows you as the author to have more free range. You're not tethered to a single character. You can jump around as much or as little as you like. So omniscient is going to be great for stories that are going to be more fantasy and are going to require a lot of world building, a lot of backstory, and you're not going to have quite that much intimacy with your characters, and that's why third person limited is a great kind of bridge between the two, because third person limited, we still have the ability to be kind of looking over the shoulder, but we're also stuck, just like the name implies, we are limited to a single character. But we are, instead of referring to the story being told as I walked into the room, I saw this thing happen, it would be told using third person pronouns. So it might be, he walked into the room, he saw there was a murder in the room. Again, unlike omniscient, where we would also be using third person pronouns, third person limited creates more of that intimacy, because we are stuck and limited with the single protagonist character or the single narrative narrative character. And so point of view is each one has its draws, each one has its pros and cons, and each one is going to provide something more to a story. And I've written stories that I originally wrote them in third person omniscient point of view, and I later found that the story worked better because I wanted to create a deeper sense of intimacy between the protagonist and that of the reader. So I've often, in the editing stages, I have sometimes revised my work to fit more into the first person narration, or I've changed it to third person limited narration, where I often refer to characters using his or her name. I might say, Mark walked into the room, he saw there was a murder in the room, and he freaked out, using third person pronouns, addressing characters by name. But again, third person limited is being stuck in a single character's point of view. You're not able to, if a character walks into a room and there's someone standing there, you can't jump between the two. You're limited to that one person's point of view. And and so some of you, I'm sure, are asking, what about second person point of view? Because we have first person point of view, we have two versions of third person. We have third person omniscient and then third person limited. And so I'm sure a lot of you out there are asking, well, what about second person point of view? And this point of view, I'm going to tell you should avoid at all costs. So the reason why you should avoid second person narration at all costs is, yes, it is something that can be used. It does exist, but it's often used in adventure style stories. It's often seen as being very gimmicky, because you're using pronouns such as you, and you are in a way literally putting the reader into the story. So you walk into the room, you see there's a murder, you can decide to turn to page whatever, and you can make that choice. And so it's often very limited in its use. I don't recommend it in any other form other than choose your own adventure stories. I've never seen it used effectively in any of the reading that I've done. It's something that I would highly recommend you stay away from. Again, beginning writers will tend to do a lot of first person narration, because first person narration is a very natural way of storytelling. When we walk into a room, when we're talking to friends, when we're talking to other people, we'll say, I was driving down the road and I saw this thing jumped out in the middle of the road. I wasn't sure what to do. I did this. I called the police. I had dinner last night. I had a bowl of cereal for breakfast this morning. It was delicious. We use pronouns of I, but again, and it's going to be very intimate with that of your narrative, your protagonist character, your narrative character. And so these are all things to consider. Again, there's not, one is not superior to the other, one is not lesser than the others. Although, again, I very much want to say, stay away from second person narration unless you're writing a choose your own adventure story, unless you're doing something gimmicky. But again, if you're writing short stories, if you're writing a novel, I would not recommend using second person narration. I would recommend considering your work and think about how many characters do you have? Do you want to be able to switch? Do you want to be able to tell how everyone in a room of 10 people, how each one of them is feeling? And if that's the case, you want to be using third person omniscient. But you could also do something that many novels have done in the past, which is each chapter is told from a first person perspective, but it's told from a different character. It's chapter 1 might be told from one character, and then chapter 2 might be the other character's recollection. And I've seen novels that'll do a flip-flopping between two protagonist characters. One chapter will be one character, the next chapter will be the other character, and that's a way to kind of work around being limited with a first person protagonist, or being limited with a first person point of view. But again, these are all things to try, all things to test out. I would highly recommend that you don't just decide that every story you write, every novel that you write is going to be in first person perspective because it's naturally, instinctively easier to do so. I would highly recommend that you do need to kind of feel your story out. Some stories are going to naturally lean one way or the other, and my recommendation is that if you're feeling stuck, maybe try reevaluating one of your stories, and you can always change it back, right? You don't have to stick with changes that you make. I would say save one or two drafts of your story, of the scene of your novel, and play around with the story. Are you getting enough emotional pull that you want by telling the story from third person omniscient? Are you getting enough pull? Would you get more of an emotional pull for the reader if you told it in first person perspective? And you have to, again, analyze your work. You have to just kind of feel it out. And I wish there was a definitive way of saying, if your story has 25 characters in it, you should not tell your story in first person perspective. But again, there's no rules about what you have to use for a point of view in your story. It comes down to how do you want the readers to feel. Writing is very much an act of storytelling, and you want to try and evoke certain emotions from your readers. And so if your beta readers are saying, I don't feel any kind of connection to your protagonist character, I don't feel any concern about him or her because it's told in a third person omniscient point of view, maybe that might be a sign for you to consider changing the point of view, reworking the story to try and put it into a first person perspective and get that intimacy with the reader that you're looking for with your protagonist character. Because these are all these, again, point of view is a tool, and you have to write and, again, experiment. Write write five stories using first-person narration. Write another 5 stories using third-person omniscient point of view. Try out using third-person limited, where you still have that, where you're simply replacing I for he, him, her, she, or whatever it is, addressing characters by name. It might be Mr. Bob walked into the room, Mrs. Bob walked into the room. And so you want to play around with these. These are all, again, these are tools, these are things, these are minor tweaks. Your story will be front and center. And again, you need to evaluate, and you need to edit your work. And again, you don't have to stick with the changes that you make. You can always revert back to an older version. But that's going to be the video. Thank you guys so much for watching. And as always, make sure you hit like, subscribe, make sure you leave a comment down below. Helps this channel grow. And thank you so much. And as always, keep it spooky. And then, of course, here's your writing bonus for sticking around all the way to the end. John walked into the room. He saw Emily sitting there at the table. She had a sinister look on her face that suggested blank. So set your timer and start writing. Thank you so much.